I did the Bryce Canyon Half Marathon. So I drove down to southern Utah, beautiful area, completely beautiful. And we actually started a run at the break of dawn, and we're like running down this hill. You see the majesty of like the mountain, like it was beautiful. And so I ran this race. And at the end of it, there was a guy who, at the end, everyone was like, good job, we did it, like, yay. And this guy was like, oh, you did great. I'm like, oh, thanks, you too. He's like, you ran really fast. I'm like, well, I finished, you finished, it was fine. And he kept talking to me, and he's like, no, you are a really fast runner. I'm like, okay. And he said to me, do you have any Kenyan blood in you? I'm like, I'm sorry, what? What? And he's like, do you have any Kenyan blood in you? Because you're just so fast. And I had a moment of like, how do I address this? Because the nice white man runner just said this to me, and he's all smiles, like, I'm like, no. And so I'm like, so I thought really fast. So what I said to him was, well, no, I don't. I'm from Ohio, but I live in Boston, and I've already run 2 marathons. So that could probably explain my fastness. Part of the things that I have seen on this journey of running, the comments that people, runners, white runners, have said to me, and as I talk to other women of color, they get comments said to them too. Now, it may be all in good intentions, but there's still this kind of subtle racialized undertone there that people don't realize. Mm-hmm. So that happened to me in Utah, but I've been to other places where I've had men and women comment on my body in a racialized way. So I was in Minnesota, of all places. I was running this race. Again, this is while running. That's what I'm like, I'm running. Why are you talking to me while I'm running? Mm-hmm. And I was in Minnesota, I was running, and this man came up from behind me and said, oh, you have such a strong back. I'm like, what? And I was like, well, you have a strong back too. And so I intentionally kind of slowed down. I'm like, okay, get away from me. And so I'm watching as he's running, and to see if he's telling other people comments, like, right, he's telling the other runners ahead of me that they have a strong back or something. And what I could see, he didn't, and he kept going. But the fact that he felt the need, right, to say that to me, I'm like
you had to change your race for that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have to deal with him, negotiating those things, right? Of like,
It really makes you kind of like feel like out of place when you couldn't just be yourself, but you had to have an excuse of why you were running. Like, oh, you must have Kenyan blood in you, or
right? Like, what? Like, I wish if I was, in right mind, like, oh, you must have Irish blood in you, because those Irish and the runners, those Irish runners. Like what? Why? Why do you feel the need to talk to me?
Yeah, right.
There's this need to talk to me. I mean, I've had people comment on my arms, like, oh, your arms are so strong, or your arms are so toned. I'm like, what? Okay.
Right.
So, like, I don't know what to say. Like, what? I don't know. It's, yeah. So and usually most states, there's been always one incident where I'm like, so there's a pattern, right? That I've noticed, and I've seen of like, what does this say in the larger picture about how we understand like race in this country, right? Like, So I've had that incident. I was in New Jersey. It was the Trenton Half Marathon. It was a double cross. We went from Trenton, New Jersey to Pennsylvania and back. And for me, that was the first time. I think I was state number 8, maybe. But for me, that was the first time I felt like a runner, because there were 600 Black women running this race. So, I mean, I think this race maybe had like 1,000, maybe 1,200 people. It wasn't that big. But to see 600 Black women running this race, which I have yet to see to this day, of like, and that's when for me, I'm like, I'm a runner. Like, that's, I mean, even though I did a marathon and I might have been up to 10 halves at that point, who knew? But I was like, oh, and I saw all these beautiful Black women of different shapes and sizes, skin tones, hair textures, and they were running this half marathon. And I was as giddy as a clam, like, hi. And I had never seen so many women in one place, Black women who ran. And that was my like eye-opening, I'm a runner. Yes, I'm part of this community, like feeling. I mean, that was for me the best thing to happen. And so, like I said, doing 46 half marathons to this day. I mean, I haven't seen so many Black women run. I mean, I've seen, I can count on maybe two hands, sometimes maybe three, but just in that space to see so many, it was great because I don't think people would see that.
Right. Do you document all of your runs?
I do. I document my state runs. So I was doing my states, and then my daily runs, because it's all about what I see, and what I'm kind of always analyzing in such a logical lens of the things that I see while running. And it's always a touchstone of what's happening in, national news in the world when I run. So when I was in South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and I ran the Charleston half marathon, I was there, was it 6 or 8 months after Dalen Roof went to the Emmanuel Church and murdered those African-American folks in the church, right? So how could you not talk about that or feel that, or at least from my perspective, right? Like what that means. And those spaces are, even in being in Utah, before running my half marathon, I was exploring, and there's I went to Arches National Park, and there's a sign for, there's a canyon called Negroid Canyon. And I was like, wait, what?
Right.
And so it's just like, and again, as I run into these spaces, and so I document everything and the interactions and the geographical settings. It's so much.
That's awesome. That's really cool. What advice would you have for new beginners, of just a blanket statement for those who are just not running? Like when you mentioned your first run, you didn't go through the course, so you didn't know how to expect, what to expect. What are some like notes you would give someone who wants to do marathons, and also like specifically to like the Black community? What would you give them as well?
I would say walk before you run. I would say also to that, find a community if you can. There's so many different groups, like I said, Black Girls Run, and other Black Men Run. If you want to to see representation of yourself, maybe there's people in your community. But if not, I would say start off walking / running and build up to it. And I think what kind of got me through was finding support with people who, again, kind of looked like me and just said, hey, you can do this. I think that's always helpful to know. So even if you're in a space where there aren't many people who look like you can find kind of like those online communities. And even that's been helpful. And also for accountability. So I'm big on accountability. And so when I do like my postings, I know people are watching me, like, where did you run today? What are you doing? And it keeps me accountable. And I think it's important for people to know, for running, it's the physical for sure, but it's also the mental, the emotional, the spiritual. So, especially being in this time of COVID, everyone is so stressed. But just to do it maybe for your own mental health, seeing running that way it's good. Or just taking the time for your own space and just to do that. I think that's good. I think so many people get caught up on the, like I was saying before, of like looking a certain way and being the fastest. And that was another thing too. I thought, well, I'm so slow, but that's not a good way to think about it. Like I run my pace. And I enjoy my pace. And I think for people to get started, it's like, run your own pace. It's okay. It's just you and the pavement. So you're not competing with anyone else. And you want to do it for your own enjoyment. Because, sometimes people are like, oh, did you run 4 miles? Did you run 5? Did you run 6? I'm like, doesn't matter. I ran. it's not time. Or people will say, well, you ran actually the other day, I ran 4.77 miles. And so someone's like, why didn't you run 5? Because I didn't want to.
I love that. Yes.
Like back
Right.
off. Back off.
Yes.
I was like, I'm done running. What I did. 4.77 miles. What you do? Okay, leave me alone. You know, so I think that's, you know, I think those are important things for people to know. Go at your own pace. Go for what makes you feel comfortable. It's not a race, and you know, do it for your overall health. And I would definitely say, especially for folks in the African American community, this is a space that is good for us. We are welcome in the space, and that it's important that we do it for our own health. I mean, on a side note, I mean, in terms of rates of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, in terms of like health disparities, African American women particularly have higher rates than other women. And so just like, I want us to be around for a long time. So just thinking of those things that you can do, whether you start off like walking around your block, you know, just a little thing, because as cliche as it sounds, just taking those few steps led to more steps, right? Like you had to do, and that's what got me going. So if someone said, hey, I need you to do 5 miles or 20 miles, I'm like, no, because I was under the notion that I was going to be doing a relay team, and just maybe I might do like a mile or something, maybe half a mile, and then I got tricked and did that whole thing. But it was just that someone had asked me, and I took those first steps. And I think that's the hard part. Like, how do you take those first steps?
That's awesome.
I have come into this running space, this running journey by accident, and it's actually made me a better person, a stronger person, a more confident person. Like I said, I started when I was 37, so I'm not you know, I wasn't running all my life, but it's now mine, right? I've made it my own, and no one can take that away.
Right.
That's so cool.
That's what I want, but I'm like, my body, my pace, get out my space.
Yep.
Right.
So I'm actually working on a manuscript about my journey, about running.
Yep.
Hopefully that will be done by the end of this year. We'll see. But just in terms of, there's so many interesting stories, and so many data from women. I've interviewed over 200 women,
Wow.
Black women, you know, so getting this information and just, you know, sharing it with others in terms of this intersection of like race and gender and class and space and running. I think there's many things that people can find relatable and I hope interesting.
Thank you so much. I think we have a wealth of knowledge here that you share with us, and we definitely.
I said so much. I'm so sorry. I'm sure
No, it's perfect. We need it. It's perfect, and it's relatable to so many people. So we definitely appreciate it.